Hi guys and welcome to Crazy Pepper Revenge. This channel is all about crazy true stories, stuff that happens in real life when things get a little bit messy, people dealing with drama, cheating, lies, breakups, and even revenge. Some stories are wild, some are emotional, but all of them will keep you watching. If you like real talk and real situations, you're in the right place. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and stick around. This is Crazy Pepper Revenge, where the stories get spicy.
The sound of Veronica's laugh cutting through her parents' dining room that Thanksgiving still echoes in my head sometimes. I just set down a stack of freshly printed business cards on the kitchen counter while helping prep the meal. She picked them up like they were junk mail flyers, twirling the matte black stack between her manicured fingers. "Seriously," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Did you print these yourself at some copy center?" Then, without even looking my direction, she flicked her wrist and dumped the entire stack into the kitchen trash bin. "Nobody cares about these," she added. The rustling of the garbage bag seemed abnormally loud in that moment. Her cousin actually snorted Chardonnay through his nose from laughing so hard. Even Veronica's mother, who practically lived at the country club, let out a barely suppressed chuckle. "Well, at least you tried, dear," she said in that patronizing tone wealthy people use when they're pretending to be kind. I stayed completely still, just kept slicing turkey, passed the cranberry sauce around, maintained that same neutral smile I'd perfected over a decade of being treated like an inconvenient houseplant by her family. "What kind of job title even is this?" her brother muttered from the side table after catching a glimpse before she tossed them. "Executive partner. Sounds like something straight out of a pyramid scheme." Another relative jumped in. "I bet he owns like one vending machine somewhere." The whole table erupted in laughter again. I didn't react to any of it. I never did. My role wasn't to put on a show. It never had been. What they didn't understand was that silence functions as a weapon. The longer you allow people to talk, the more they reveal their true nature. So I waited. Then Douglas spoke up. Douglas was Veronica's uncle, her father's older brother, with deteriorating eyesight and trembling hands. Not exactly someone you'd expect to shift the entire atmosphere of a room. He'd been quiet most of the evening, nursing a glass of Pinot Noir and observing the whole circus with the exhausted resignation of someone who'd survived 3 divorces and 2 hostile board takeovers. While the jokes continued, he wandered into the kitchen area. I noticed him kneel down beside the trash can and fish out one of my cards like he'd discovered something ancient and valuable. He squinted at it, adjusting his reading glasses, and then completely froze. The card started trembling in his weathered hand. His wine glass in the other hand slipped and shattered on the tile floor. The stem snapped cleanly in half. Everyone stopped talking mid-sentence. Forks paused in midair. Even the family's golden retriever stopped chewing on the dinner roll he'd stolen. "This title," Douglas said, his voice brittle and confused. "Is this legitimate?" Nobody answered him initially. He looked directly at me, suddenly appearing stone sober despite the wine. "You're the executive partner at Callisto Equity?" I gave a single calm nod, completely unbothered. Veronica's fork clattered against her china plate. "Wait, what even is Callisto?" Douglas cut her off sharply. "You don't know." His eyes darted back to the card like it might detonate. Veronica's father, Mitchell, called out from across the room with irritation, "Douglas, don't start whatever this is." But Douglas completely ignored him, still staring at that card like it contained nuclear codes. "Callisto just secured the federal warehousing contract, the entire Eastern Seaboard logistics bid. Every major firm on the coast was competing for it. You know who lost?" He paused for effect. "We did. Our company lost it. And you're telling me he," pointing at me, "is the person who secured it?" The laughter died instantly like someone had cut the power. I reached calmly for the gravy boat and said quietly, "I mentioned it was a productive quarter." Veronica just blinked at me, her mouth hanging slightly open like a door left ajar. One of the younger cousins finally broke the heavy silence. "What's federal warehousing?" The aunt beside him whispered something about military supply contracts and government logistics. Veronica's voice came out shaky when she tried to speak. I took another bite of turkey. It was overcooked and dry, honestly pretty forgettable. What wasn't forgettable was witnessing the precise moment when her family's arrogance shattered like Douglas's wine glass on that tile floor. You could actually hear it, feel it in the air. That sudden shift from contempt and derision to uncertainty and confusion. That's when I knew with certainty I wouldn't need to say another word. The silence would finish the job tonight. Douglas caught up with me later on the back patio while everyone else remained inside, probably still debating cranberry sauce brands like it was critical policy. The night air had a sharp bite to it, but his voice came out in a whisper so sharp it could have sliced through steel. "I thought Callisto was a ghost operation," he said slowly. "Just rumors floating around. Quiet bids here and there, no public board of directors, no press releases." He examined the card in his hand again, like he still couldn't believe what was printed there. "But you're the lead partner." I didn't bother with any theatrics, just nodded once. He leaned heavily against the deck railing, like someone had physically kicked all the air from his lungs. "My God," he muttered under his breath. "You're the one who outbid us on the Port Archer contract, the federal logistics and warehousing deal." He looked up at me with genuine shock. "We spent 8 months actively pursuing that contract. 8 months. And you just sealed it?" His voice cracked slightly at the end, like he desperately didn't want to believe the answer he already knew deep down. I kept my tone completely flat and emotionless. "Closed it, last Tuesday." His mouth hung open for several seconds. I could see him doing the mental calculations, watching dominoes fall behind his eyes in real time. His company had been relying heavily on that contract to maintain their entire East Coast operational footprint. It wasn't just a business deal to them. It was their main artery. More laughter burst out from inside the house again. Veronica's brother had probably made another dismissive jab at my executive-sounding title. I heard someone shout loudly, "I bet he printed those cards at an office supply store." Douglas didn't laugh at all. He was actually sweating now, despite the cold November air. "Does Mitchell know about this?" he asked urgently, referring to Veronica's father. "Not yet," I said simply. "He doesn't." Douglas exhaled hard and pinched the bridge of his nose hard. Damn it, damn it. He looked physically ill. "You realize this directly affects half our entire storage pipeline infrastructure. You've effectively boxed us into subleasing on our own established routes." Then he paused, processing something else. "And Mitchell is still in there, mocking you like you're someone's personal assistant." I just shrugged casually. People see exactly what they want to see. He stared at me for a long, uncomfortable moment. "You're not planning to tell them tonight, are you?" I asked him what realistic difference it would make. His jaw visibly tightened. "It would completely humiliate them." I took the business card back from his trembling hand and slipped it into my wallet. They've had that opportunity all evening long. I didn't wait for any response from him, just stepped back into the warmth of the house. The bright lights, the background noise, the smugly confident voices, they all seemed incredibly distant from the man Douglas had just realized he'd been sitting across from at dinner. I said my polite goodbyes, kissed Veronica on the cheek. She barely glanced up from whatever shallow conversation her cousins were still circling around. "Leaving somewhere?" she asked, sounding distracted and disinterested. "Yeah," I said. "Got an early morning call scheduled. More of your little empire to manage?" She joked with that identical mocking tone she'd maintained throughout the entire night. I just smiled pleasantly and nodded. Something exactly like that. The truth was, I hadn't even planned on bringing those business cards tonight. They weren't meant for her family. I'd printed a fresh batch that same week because my old title had become outdated after recent promotions. The ink was literally still drying when I slipped them into my coat pocket that morning. What they didn't know, and wouldn't discover until much later, was that Callisto Equity had finalized 3 major acquisitions that exact same week. Not just the federal warehousing contract, but 3 critical feeder companies that supplied warehousing infrastructure, technology systems, security services, and complete distribution networks. Every single route that her family's firm fundamentally depended on for operations. They weren't just about to learn who I really was. They were about to learn precisely what I controlled. And it wouldn't arrive in some flashy headline announcement. It would appear in their balance sheets, quiet, surgical, absolutely final. By Monday morning, the whispers had transformed into urgent phone calls, and Veronica's phone simply wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. She sat at the kitchen island, her coffee completely untouched and going cold, scrolling frantically through group chats that had shifted from mocking to full panic mode. One cousin sent a link to a business filing, Another sent screenshots of email redirects. Then the call finally came from Olivia, the family's self-appointed coordinator of all business gossip and insider information. Olivia worked in procurement at Ridgemont Logistics Group, one of the mid-tier vendors that serviced their family's entire supply chain operations. "Hey," Olivia said, completely breathless with no pleasantries whatsoever. "Tell me this information isn't accurate. Your husband, did he actually acquire Norval Supply?" Veronica laughed hard at the absurdity. "What? No way. He's still running that tiny startup operation, something involving subscription boxes or packaging." Olivia didn't laugh even a little. "No, you're not understanding me. Norval is completely gone, absorbed, folded directly into something called Callisto, effective last Thursday. All their email addresses are bouncing back as undeliverable." Veronica blinked several times. "Wait, are you being serious right now? I work directly with them, Veronica. Half of our first quarter inventory flows through Norval's systems, and now every single contact email is automatically redirecting to Callisto Holdings domains." There was a heavy pause. "Did you have any knowledge about this happening?" Veronica stared at her own reflection in the microwave door, looking pale. "No," she said very slowly. "I absolutely didn't." Olivia hung up without saying goodbye or any closing remarks. Veronica set her phone down carefully on the counter. The silence throughout the house felt wrong somehow, unbalanced, like everything was teetering on the edge of tipping over completely. She stood up and walked deliberately to my home office. The door wasn't locked. Never was. I'd never needed locks on any doors. My laptop was still sitting open on the desk where I'd left it. She hesitated for just a second, then moved quickly with purpose. She didn't know exactly what she was searching for. Maybe some tiny sliver of truth she could laugh off. Maybe something concrete to confirm this whole Callisto situation was just an unfortunate coincidence. A simple name overlap. Maybe some shell corporation with a borrowed logo and no substance. Instead, what she found was a folder clearly labeled Confirmed Contracts Q1, sitting right there on the desktop. A detailed spreadsheet systematically listing over 40 companies, specifically including Norval Supply, Castor Logistics International, and Turnfleet Distribution Services. Multiple email correspondence, threads from D. Parker, CallistoHoldings.com. An internal memorandum officially welcoming 6 new logistics coordinators to Callisto's Atlanta Regional Division. Every single name she instantly recognized from her father's established vendor network that kept their business running. Her throat went completely dry. Then came the unmistakable quiet sound of the shower shutting off upstairs. She slammed the laptop closed and backed out of the office like she'd stepped on broken glass. I walked downstairs just a few minutes later with a towel draped around my neck, hair still damp, appearing calm as always. She was seated back at the kitchen island, staring blankly at the marble countertop. I didn't look surprised at all. "You went through my computer files?" I asked, my voice low and even. She didn't speak initially, couldn't find words. The laptop was still humming quietly on the desk behind her in the other room. I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee, added absolutely no sugar, and took a measured sip. Then casually, without any hint of malice or triumph in my voice, I said, "Next time you decide to throw something away, make sure you check what's actually printed on it first." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was literally nothing she could say that wouldn't dig the hole deeper. Because in that precise moment, reality hit her with full force. This wasn't about some lucky business deal. This wasn't a random fluke where I'd accidentally ended up on the winning side of a contract bidding war. This was an extensive network, and not the kind her family played tennis with at the club. This was a carefully woven lattice of strategic acquisitions, legitimate legal structures, shell entities with real operational teeth. It had geographical reach, careful coordination, multiple protective layers. She'd assumed I was just tinkering around in the background, playing small-time entrepreneur with safe money from conservative investors, essentially a harmless hobby to keep me occupied. But she'd been completely and utterly wrong. The man she'd openly mocked for printing his own business cards had just successfully folded 3 of her family's most essential legacy vendors into a company she couldn't even begin to comprehend. And this had all happened just 2 days ago. She suddenly remembered something else from Thanksgiving night. The moment when Douglas asked if the card was legitimate. When the entire room went cold and silent. She had laughed nervously, tried to brush it off like a joke. But Douglas hadn't laughed, and neither would her father, once he fully understood what was rapidly unraveling before his eyes. Because now this wasn't about family pride or social status anymore. This was about fundamental control. And she had just realized, with stunning clarity, how little actual control they had remaining. It was approaching midnight when everything came together. The house was eerily quiet except for the periodic clink of ice cubes in her father's crystal glass and the low murmur of his stressed voice echoing down the hallway. Veronica had come downstairs simply looking for water but stopped dead when she heard him in the kitchen. The tone wasn't his usual booming confidence that commanded every room. It was something much tighter, more clipped, like he was desperately trying not to lose his grip on reality. She stepped softly in bare feet on the hardwood floor and stopped just short of the doorway entrance. He hadn't noticed her presence yet. His back was facing the hallway, hunched over the island counter, one hand gripping his phone in a white-knuckled grip, the other hand rubbing his temple like thinking physically hurt. No, Douglas confirmed it definitively, he was saying into the phone. The bid is completely gone. They secured the entire contract under some umbrella corporate group, Callisto Equity Holdings. A pause as he listened. No, not public at all. Quiet as hell, which is what makes this so goddamn frustrating. No board presence anywhere. Everyone in the industry assumed Norval would roll smoothly into first quarter as our primary supplier. Now we're completely scrambling to find alternatives. Veronica's heart actually stuttered in her chest. Callisto Equity Holdings. She stepped carefully into the kitchen area. Dad? He turned around quickly, clearly startled. His face was flushed red, though not from booze, but from pure stress. What are you doing awake at this hour? He asked quickly, hitting mute on his phone. I heard you say Callisto Equity Holdings, she said quietly, barely above a whisper. That's the exact company name on Marcus's business card. For a single beat, he just stared at her like he couldn't process the sentence structure. Then realization hit him fast and devastatingly hard. Your husband is directly tied to Callisto? She didn't answer verbally, not really. Her prolonged silence communicated everything. He let out a bitter, harsh laugh and shook his head, muttering into the empty air. Jesus Christ almighty. No wonder Douglas looked like he'd witnessed a ghost. She moved slowly toward the counter, her voice getting quieter. You're saying his company actually beat yours? It wasn't even close to a fair fight, he snapped back. They came in completely under the radar, swept the entire contract, bundled logistics with security and fleet management, absolutely everything. It's not just this one deal, Veronica. We're completely exposed across the board. Douglas says they've got controlling fingers in at least 4 critical feeder companies. I don't even know what systems we're still legitimately attached to anymore. The genuine panic in his voice cracked something deep inside her. She had grown up firmly believing her father was completely unshakable, a force of nature. He'd once told a state senator to get in line and wait his turn. Now he looked like a man suddenly realizing the line had moved entirely, and he wasn't anywhere near it. Veronica sat down very slowly, the cold granite of the island suddenly feeling freezing beneath her palms. He never talked about any of it, she said quietly, half to herself. Not once did he ever mention Callisto by name. I genuinely thought he was still dealing with that small subscription box firm. Her father actually snorted with bitter amusement. That was probably a complete decoy operation. Did you ever actually ask him in detail what he was working on with his laptop? She nodded slowly, remembering. I checked it Friday morning, found all the contracts, Norval, Turnfleet, Castor Logistics. There's way more companies listed, way more than I could process. Her father exhaled deeply and leaned heavily on the island. So he's not just somehow involved peripherally. He is Callisto. He's the entire operation. Veronica didn't know what to say to that. All she could think about was Thanksgiving dinner just days ago. The cruel laughter, the casual mocking, the way she'd carelessly tossed his cards into the trash like worthless scraps of paper, the way she'd dismissed him completely in front of her entire extended family. And now, just a handful of days later, the company name printed on those discarded cards was systematically gutting her family's business influence and from the inside out. She'd personally invited this destruction in. She felt her face flush hot with something far deeper and more profound than simple embarrassment. This wasn't just about her failing marriage anymore. This was about absolutely everything she'd taken for granted, her entire privileged life. Power, status, control, and how she'd utterly failed to see the quiet storm steadily building in the man who'd been sleeping beside her all these years. "Don't tell anyone about this yet," her father said, pacing now like a caged animal. "We need to fully understand how deep this penetration goes before we make any of it public knowledge." But it was already so much worse than he understood. She could feel it deep in her bones. Callisto wasn't just some lucky upstart company with accidentally good timing. It was a precisely calculated machine, built piece by methodical piece by the man she'd openly belittled for years without consequence. He didn't wear expensive tailored suits to impress people. He didn't chase headlines or media attention. He chased leverage and control. And now, with every critical vendor that quietly slipped away, every essential contract that mysteriously vanished, her father's carefully built empire was bleeding out, and her husband was the one holding the scalpel with steady hands. Veronica's phone rang just after sunrise the next morning. Douglas's name appeared on the screen. The last time they'd spoken, his voice had cracked with pure panic. This time sounded different. More controlled but unbearably heavy, like someone who'd finally mapped out an approaching wildfire and realized it was already far too late to stop the spread. "Veronica," he said with absolutely no greeting or preamble, "this isn't just about Norval Supply. I've been digging deeper all night." She stayed completely quiet, coffee mug in hand, standing barefoot on the cold kitchen tile. "He's been systematically buying up feeder companies," Douglas continued urgently, "all small regional operations, logistics providers, packaging services, fleet management services, distribution networks, routing optimization. Some of them were barely hanging on financially. He didn't just outbid us on contracts. He rescued failing companies, rebranded them completely, folded them under Callisto Holdings, and absolutely nobody in the industry even noticed it happening." She pressed the speaker button and set the phone down carefully, needing both hands to steady the ceramic mug. "You're absolutely certain it's him? I personally traced the director filings through public records," he said. "It's all structured indirectly through holding companies." "But Veronica, your husband's fingerprints are literally everywhere across this network. His name doesn't always appear directly on documents, but the LLC formation patterns, the board reshuffling, the strategic redirections, it's all him. The entire structure is deliberately opaque. The silence completely intentional." She forced a laugh, but it came out brittle and fake. "He's not that strategically sophisticated." "You said that exact same thing last week," Douglas snapped back harshly. "And now half your father's critical vendors have completely different email addresses and contact systems." Heavy silence hung between them. "He never bragged about anything," she said quietly, mostly to herself. "Not once in all our years together." "No, of course not," Douglas agreed. "Because bragging gets you noticed and investigated. He didn't want media attention or recognition. He wanted total ownership and control." She reached for the laptop again, opened that same detailed spreadsheet she hadn't dared look at since Friday morning. It was still there, untouched. The complete acquisition roadmap. Only now it made perfect strategic sense. Every single company had a specific operational function. One handled dry goods climate-controlled storage. Another managed fleet dispatching and route optimization. One ran all regulatory compliance paperwork. Another controlled AI routing software for final mile delivery optimization. She clicked open the integration planning tab with trembling fingers. There it was in bold text. Q3 forecast. Complete systems integration. Supply chain ownership. And then in bold, projected margin control, 72. She stared at that number, unable to process it. 72%. He hadn't just built a successful business. He'd built absolute control of the entire regional infrastructure. Not loud, not flashy, not public, but completely ironclad and unbreakable. And the absolute worst part? All of it had happened completely under their noses while they laughed. While they mocked his hobby business, he'd systematically woven controlling vines through the entire foundation of their family's regional operation. Not owning every piece outright, but controlling every single essential piece strategically. He's not just another vendor anymore, Douglas said, his voice hollow. He's the spine of the entire system. Remove him, and half our operations completely cease functioning. Veronica gripped the edge of the table hard. Her father had built his entire empire on handshakes, reputation, and ego. He never anticipated someone like Marcus, someone who didn't want the spotlight or recognition, who didn't care about being invited to the exclusive club or praised at family dinners. She remembered her own dismissive words from Thanksgiving night. Nobody cares about your cards. God, the devastating irony. He didn't need anyone to care, because while they were busy building image and reputation, he was building critical infrastructure and control. I need to talk to him directly, she muttered, standing up quickly. Douglas exhaled loudly. Don't threaten him under any circumstances. Don't apply any pressure. He's holding the entire system in delicate balance. The minute he feels genuinely threatened, he could deliberately let it collapse on purpose. And then we're all completely finished. The line went dead abruptly. She stood alone in the kitchen, heart pounding violently. The walls of the house felt different now, like they weren't actually hers anymore, like they were constructed from borrowed confidence and paper-thin illusions. And at the center of absolutely everything was a man she thought she completely understood. The man who sat silently at family dinners, who let insults roll off his back without reaction, who picked up tabs and said nothing when her father joked about startup toys and hustle culture fantasies. That quiet man had systematically threaded their entire world together like aggressive vines slowly strangling a stone mansion. And now, if he decided to pull hard, the whole elaborate structure would groan loudly, then crack, then completely fall. The boardroom had never been silent for this long in living memory. Normally, it buzzed with constant posturing, interruptions, dry competitive jokes, the occasional ego-driven monologue about quarterly dominance and market share. But today there were no polished presentations on the table, no slides, just scattered papers, folders, multiple laptops, and the heavy oppressive stench of panic poorly masked by expensive cologne. Her father stood rigidly at the head of the long walnut table, sleeves rolled up, jaw set hard. The veins in his hands visibly bulged every time he gripped the leather armrest. Veronica sat 2 seats down from him, arms crossed defensively, eyes flicking between directors who absolutely refused to make any eye contact with her. Everything is compromised, he said flatly, no emotion. Norval's not ours anymore. Castor's not renewing any contracts. Turnfleet redirected their entire route, planning to different infrastructure last Thursday without warning. Can we legally cancel these agreements? One director asked, voice tight with stress. We tried that approach already, her father snapped. There are no cancellation clauses in any of the contracts. Every single agreement is completely watertight, ironclad, executed with legal precision we've never seen before. A younger board member at the far end of the table raised his hand tentatively. Do we even know who Callisto actually is? There's no organizational chart anywhere, no press releases, no CEO profile on any platform. Veronica didn't speak at all. Her father didn't look at her sympathetically. He glared with barely contained fury. But it was Veronica's mother who finally said it, quiet but absolutely cutting. You told all of us he was completely harmless. The sentence hung in the room like a smoke alarm nobody could reach or silence. Veronica felt her skin crawl uncomfortably. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, but her throat was completely dry. She desperately wanted to say something, anything, to shift the crushing weight off her shoulders. But what could she possibly say? That the man she married, the man she openly belittled at family dinners, had just strategically outplayed every experienced executive in this room? That he'd been laying careful groundwork while she rolled her eyes at his business calls? That she'd laughed cruelly as she threw away the business cards that were now the only thing standing between their family and complete logistical collapse? Her silence was her complete answer. One of the senior advisors, a trusted family friend for literally decades, finally leaned back in his chair and sighed deeply. I told you years ago that arrogance blinds far more effectively than failure ever could. Nobody in the room corrected him or disagreed. Her father opened a thick folder slowly. Inside were copies of supplier agreements they had signed over the past 18 months. They had looked completely routine at the time, Favorable terms, slightly aggressive scheduling clauses, but nothing that raised any red flags during review, except now. Every single one of those contracts had been originally drafted by Callisto subsidiaries, operating under completely different names at the time of signing. Smart, silent, strategic beyond anything they'd encountered. And Veronica's husband had personally orchestrated everything from the shadows. He didn't need a seat at this table. He owned the floor underneath it. "We're completely entangled," another executive muttered quietly. "If we try to untangle ourselves now, we lose supply infrastructure for at least 6 months minimum. That's half our entire distribution cycle wiped out. Losing half our distribution would completely tank first quarter projections. Tanking first quarter might actually be our best possible outcome at this point," someone else whispered ominously. Veronica's father stood again, palms flat on the table. "We regroup strategically. We go back through contracts line by line. We find legal foothold somewhere. There has to be something." "Have you talked to him directly yet?" her mother asked pointedly. He didn't answer, just looked away. Veronica finally spoke, her voice quiet but crystal clear. "He won't come to any negotiating table." Everyone turned to stare at her. "He already set the table," she continued softly. "We just didn't realize we were eating off it the whole time." The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable tension. It was collective acceptance of defeat. They had treated Marcus like an insignificant footnote, a harmless bystander to their empire building. And now the quiet bystander had completely rewired the entire grid while they weren't paying attention. Veronica looked down at her hands resting on the polished wood. Her wedding ring caught the overhead light. She had worn it like a badge of normalcy, of control over her life. But it wasn't that anymore. It was a reminder, not of love or partnership, but of who she should have known, and who now knew absolutely everything about her privileged world while saying nothing at all. Saturday morning brought the storm with full force. The front page of the Business Tribune landed with a quiet thunk on driveways across 5 states. Some readers ignored it. Some just skimmed headlines. But by noon, it was in every inbox that mattered, from invisible to inevitable. "How Callisto Quietly Captured the East Coast Supply Chain," read the headline. Below it wasn't a glossy portrait photo. No smiling executive in a blazer leaning casually against a warehouse door. It was a photograph of a single business card. Matte black, minimal text, embossed lettering. Marcus Reeves, Executive Partner, Callisto Equity Holdings. Veronica stared at it on her tablet screen, completely frozen in place at her breakfast bar. The exact same card she'd thrown in the garbage while laughing. The one that had made her entire family laugh so hard. Now it was the symbol of what every boardroom was whispering about nervously. And she was nowhere near the center anymore. Just a footnote. She clicked into the article with trembling fingers, hands shaking. It was methodical, surgical in its analysis. A detailed timeline of silent acquisitions, strategic contracts, anonymous shell LLCs, logistics, packaging, supply chain redundancies, all systematically consolidated under Callisto Equity in under 18 months. Absolutely unprecedented. The journalist called it the quiet surge. One section broke everything down meticulously by region. Another section featured quotes from industry CEOs and executives praising the operation's precision. Whoever's behind Callisto isn't just business-minded. They're a ghost in the machine. They made sure nobody saw them coming until they were the only option remaining. Another quote, "A masterclass in being systematically underestimated." He played invisible long enough for everyone to dismiss him completely. Then he rewrote all the rules. Veronica felt like the floor under her had cracked wide open reading that last quote. It wasn't just industry analysis. It was a mirror held up to her face. Her phone lit up with notifications. First, it was Kelsey from the old internship group chat. "Is this your Marcus? Like your husband, Marcus?" Then her yoga instructor texted, "Wait, isn't this your guy? You said he worked with boxes or something?" Then her investment club's group chat absolutely exploded with messages. "Veronica, that's your last name, right? Reeves. You're married to this person? Why didn't you say anything?" She didn't reply to any of them, just watched the messages pile up. The worst notification came 5 minutes later from a fund partner she'd been trying to impress for over a year. Hey, if your husband's ever looking for minority equity partners, please connect me. Incredible strategy. Her hands shook badly. She nearly dropped the phone. She remembered mocking him about the empire he claimed to be building. All those dinners where she'd cut him off mid-sentence to talk about her own business deals. The way she'd corrected him in front of her parents when he mentioned distribution bottlenecks. Like he was the amateur who didn't understand. Now the entire industry was quoting his playbook and articles, and she was being tagged in LinkedIn comments like a +1 accessory at her own wedding. She opened Instagram reluctantly. A friend had already posted a story screenshot with the article. We thought he was just the quiet guy at parties. Turns out he owns half the table. Someone had commented, "Isn't that Veronica's husband? Didn't she mock him at Thanksgiving?" Her stomach dropped sickeningly. This wasn't just a career achievement being celebrated, it was legacy being built. And her public ridicule of it was now part of the narrative everyone was discussing. Nobody was asking about her marketing startup partnerships anymore. Nobody cared about her networking brunches or strategy workshops. They were all asking one simple thing. Is this your husband? And the more they asked, the clearer the devastating answer became. Not just that it was him, but that while she was busy laughing at his business cards, he had quietly turned one into a weapon and aimed it precisely at the world she thought she controlled. He came home just after 8 that evening. No grand entrance, no bags, just the quiet click of the door, the soft thud of shoes coming off, and the unmistakable presence of a man who no longer had anything to prove to anyone. Veronica had been waiting on the couch for over an hour, mentally rehearsing lines. Apologies that wouldn't sound like desperate groveling, explanations that might sound remotely sincere. Nothing she came up with felt adequate. And now, seeing him walk in, composed, completely unreadable, she understood exactly why. He looked at her like someone might look at a hotel lobby they used to frequent regularly. Familiar, but not sentimental. She stood up quickly. "I didn't know," she whispered desperately. He nodded once calmly, like she had finally caught up to a truth he'd been living with for years. "I didn't know any of it," she continued, voice breaking. "Not what you were building, not what it meant. Marcus, I didn't see it." "You didn't want to," he said quietly. No anger whatsoever, just simple fact. She stepped forward slowly, carefully. "But we can still—" He pulled back before she could reach for his hand. Not harshly, not like angry rejection, more like a door that had always been closed and locked. She'd just never bothered to check. "No," he said, soft, final. Without saying a word, he placed a plain folder on the coffee table, and it was the kind you'd find in any office. No logo, no label. It felt light, but what it stood for made it heavy. She stared at it for a long moment, then slowly sat down. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside was one document. Divorce papers. Simple, no fights, no court drama, no money war. Everything split evenly, all ready to sign. Her chest tightened as she realized the papers had likely been written long before the news broke. Maybe even before their last holiday meal. At the bottom of the final page was a short note, written by hand, one line. "You threw the card away. I kept the empire." Her throat burned. "This isn't you," she whispered. "You're not this cold. You never wanted—" "I wanted a team," he said evenly. "You wanted a crowd." She shook her head fast. "I messed up. I know I did." He looked at her. "You were loud." The words cut deeper than she expected. He sat across from her, leaning forward, hands on his knees. It wasn't just a table between them. It was a gap too wide to cross. "I never wanted praise," he said. "I just wanted to be treated like an equal. You never talked about any of this." She said weakly. "You didn't listen," he replied. "You didn't ask what I was building. You asked when I'd stop pretending to run a company. You called my work fake. You told people I kept failing. I thought—" "I know what you thought," he interrupted. "And you made sure everyone else thought it too." The room went still. She looked at the folder again. No yelling, no long court battle, just a clean cut. And the truth hit her hard. He wasn't hurting her on purpose. He was just done trying. Tears filled her eyes. "You won't even try to fix this?" "I did," he said, standing, "for 7 years. She watched him walk down the hall, the same hall he used after tense dinners, back when she thought he was just sulking. Now she understood. He hadn't been hiding, he had been building. The space between them wasn't new, she just noticed it too late. when she reached for a hand that was no longer there. That year, the dining room felt larger, though nothing had changed. The same long table, the same bright light overhead, the same flower display ordered every Thanksgiving for years. But the mood was gone. Veronica sat stiff, chewing dry turkey that tasted like regret. Fewer people came this time. Some stopped calling after the headlines. Others pulled away once her father lost control of the company. No one blamed her out loud. They didn't need to. Her father looked worn down, smaller. He had sold nearly half the business earlier that year. He called it a smart move. Everyone knew it wasn't. Her uncle had retired, but she had seen the letter. The fallout broke him. The company still existed, it just wasn't theirs. The jokes were gone. No bold toasts, no sharp comments. Everyone spoke softer, like they'd all been humbled and didn't know how to act. Her cousin Jamie leaned over. "Is he coming?" Veronica shook her head without looking up. Jamie nodded. "Yeah, that tracks." No one said his name anymore, not the family, not the people who once laughed at him. Yet he showed up everywhere, on reports and deals and calls with lawyers trying to get back power they never really had. What hurt most was how clean his exit was. No revenge, no fire. He just left. And the empty space he left behind was louder than any attack. Across town, in a brick building turned into offices, Marcus hosted his own dinner. No place cards, no family tension, just his crew. Partners, leads, builders. The table was smaller, warmer, real. Between food and drinks, he handed out new business cards. Clean design, just his name, the company, and a short line. "We don't explain, we act." They laughed. They got it. Most of them had been doubted too. That's why they stayed. Back at the estate, Veronica left before dessert. She said she felt sick. Really, she couldn't stand hearing her own words from last year echo in her head. Who even uses business cards anymore? She knew now. She thought about the new team, the new table, the world that replaced her. She used to sit beside the man who built it. Now she was just a lesson. That night, her father moved through a grand event hall that once belonged to him. Same lights, same food, same sponsor tables. But the whispers were new. People watched him pass, talked behind glasses. He tried to ignore it until he saw the sponsor wall. Tall, bright, covered in flowers, near the top was a name he knew well. Callisto Holdings below it. In smaller text, "In memory of those who built in silence." He stood there longer than he meant to. It wasn't sadness. It was worse. It was realizing no one needed his name anymore. A man walked past without greeting him. Another shook his hand out of habit. Nearby, a woman whispered, "He used to run something, right?" Her date shrugged. "I think Callisto took it over." Took it over. Years of work, reduced to a footnote. He left early, no fuss, just cold air and quiet. Veronica was waiting in the car. They didn't talk. A couple walked by, smiling. The man held a Callisto gift bag. The woman read a card aloud. "Executive partner." That's him, right? Veronica glanced out and saw the black card, raised letters, a name, Marcus Reeves, her ex-husband. No speech, no drama, just a name that now carried weight. The card disappeared into a purse. Veronica looked down. Her father drove off. No one noticed them leave. They used to be the power, the noise, the center of the room. Now their names weren't even on the wall, his was. And for the first time, Veronica didn't laugh. She finally understood. He didn't just win, he made them disappear.